As has been noted, I'm on a tour promoting the book, The Power of Communication, Skills to Build Trust, Inspire Loyalty, and Lead Effectively. And what I do in the book is really three separate things that are woven together or braided together. The first is looking at what works and what doesn't work when leaders are trying to win hearts and minds. What works and what doesn't work when leaders are trying to win hearts and minds. Whether the hearts and minds they're trying to win are of employees, or the hearts and minds they're trying to win are of B2B customers, or the hearts and minds they're trying to win are of investors or regulators or business partners. What works and what doesn't work, and how can we help our teams do the things that work and avoid doing the things that we know don't work? The second thing the book does, which is a little off the beaten path, is it takes a publication of the United States Marine Corps. It takes the United States Marine Corps doctrinal publication #1 called Warfighting, and it translates that publication as a set of conceptual frameworks for effective leadership communication. And what I found, and I'll demonstrate when we get to the crisis section, simply by changing a couple of words in the Marine Corps Warfighting Manual, changing the word war to communication, changing the word enemy to audience, we can find a very powerful way to understand how to engage stakeholders. I see a smile. Okay, you're going to hold me accountable for fulfilling that promise. Good. How do we win hearts and minds as part of a strategic, goal-oriented process to change the business environment? Just as war is the continuation of policy by other means, communication is the continuation of business by other means. And how do we align all of our resources to accomplish the purpose that we're trying to accomplish? That's the second thing in the book. It isn't a standalone, it's braided throughout. And the third thing we do is then take all of that, take all of the things that work and don't work, and take these Marine Corps conceptual frameworks of how do you become genuinely, habitually strategic in winning hearts and minds, and distill from that the 9 principles of effective leadership communication. That's the book. Today, I'm going to unbundle just one of those principles from 2 different frames. This gentleman is someone who wrote one of the most influential books in Western civilization that many people have never heard of. Actually, to be truthful, he didn't write the book. He wrote the outline and notes to the book, and then his wife wrote the book when he died. I love that little tidbit. This is Karl von Clausewitz, the 19th century Prussian military strategist, whose wife wrote the book attributed to him called On War. And On War is famous for the sentence I just spoke, and that is, war isn't about fighting, war is the continuation of policy by other means. The purpose of war is not to fight, the purpose of war is to change the political climate in some meaningful way. And all business strategy derives from Clausewitz. When I started teaching communication strategy 24 years ago at New York University, part of what I needed to do was to help communicators understand strategy. And I wanted them to read On War, but On War is really hard to read. It's about 550 pages of really teeny type, translated from really, really complicated German. And I wasn't sufficiently sadistic to subject my graduate students to that. But I was able to extract a couple of tidbits from Clausewitz and bring them to life. And one of the tidbits that I found useful with clients and with students, and that I offer to you, is a single sentence deep inside On War that defines war in a particular way. And Clausewitz defined war this way. He said, war is an act of will directed toward a living entity that reacts. That war isn't about shooting people. It isn't about shooting cannons at people. War is about provoking a reaction intentionally. And I've always found that to be a really interesting way of understanding the nature of war, but also to understand the nature of communication. So 24 years ago when I started teaching, I said, well, what if you just change one word? And so what I did is I began to ask my students to think of communication as an act of will, directed toward a living entity that reacts. And a really interesting thing begins to happen when you frame it that way. That when you think of communication as an act of will, the first thing you note is it's always done on purpose. When it's done right, it's always done on purpose. It's always done for a purpose. And the question, did we succeed or not, isn't about how you felt when you were doing it. It's about, did you accomplish your purpose? And I have found over 33 years of being in the communication consulting business that very often when we ask ourselves, did it work, we tend to talk about the process of communicating and not about the outcome, not about the purpose we were hoping to be in the service of. I see some heads nodding, especially some heads that have experienced it well and poorly. And when communication is done right, you measure the success based on the outcome, not based on the process metrics. Process metrics are important, but they're not sufficient. What you need is the outcome metric. So the starting point is always, what is the purpose of communication? So communication is an act of will. It is only done for a purpose, it's only done on purpose, it's intentional, it's never accidental. And when you look at celebrated cases of miscommunication, it's because people missed this principle. The second element of that is directed toward a living entity. Audiences are people. Audiences aren't abstractions. Audiences are people. And we need to engage people as people and not as intellectual exercises. And we need to engage them in ways that work for them. And all too often in the professional practice of communication, whether it's in marketing or advertising or public relations or internal communications, employee communications, things are sent and we consider our job done. Email sent. And we haven't really thought through well enough, well, who is the human being who has to read it and act on it and who's going to be scared or confused on reading it, and how do we change the dynamic so that those we care about are not scared or confused? And then finally, that reacts. The only reason to engage is to provoke a reaction. And if we're going to engage, we need to begin by asking, who is it we're trying to provoke a reaction from? What is the reaction we want to provoke? And how do we then organize all of our energies and activities to provoke that reaction? That's a really simple conceptual framework on how to structure communication wherever in the chain of command it may sit, in ways that actually accomplish business goals.